Right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. This is Jaleesa Tate. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at MEMA. And I just want to thank you all for taking the opportunity to join us today to learn more about this year's upcoming grant cycle for FEMA's Flood Mitigation Assistance Program and Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program as well, too. Just a few housekeeping items prior to us really getting started and jumping into everything. We will be recording the meeting for today, so the recording has started. In the subsequent days and weeks to follow, we will be placing all of the recordings and meeting materials on our website to basically refresh it and still ensure that you have the meeting materials and information available for this year's cycle of the BRIC and FMA programs. Additionally, materials from last year will remain on the website as well too, so you'll always have those to go back and reference as well. In an attempt to try and make today's meeting engaging and interactive as well too, we will be using a program called Slido. So you can go to the website listed on the screen, slido.com. You can do that on your cell phone or on your computer as well too. And then when it asks you for the meeting number, you're just going to put in BRIC 21, and then you'll be able to participate in the questions and polls that we have throughout the presentation for today. Right? And then also you'll be able to put questions into that platform that we'll answer at the end of the session, or also feel free to put those questions into the chat as we go through the presentation today as well. All right, and give me 1 second. Okay. It would not be a virtual meeting without a technical difficulty. Okay, so today what we want to do is essentially provide a high-level overview of the FMA and BRIC programs. Currently, right now, the FEMA Notice of Funding Opportunity has not been released for this year. So today is not really meant to give you the details as far as like the actual criteria, but to basically state the goals and general eligibility for both of the programs. We'll also go over who is actually eligible to apply and who's not. So that way, for those joining on the call here, you will be able to get that as well too, and then start to learn how to form partnerships. We'll also go over the tentative timeline, and I'll provide you some immediate next steps that you can begin taking, and then we'll answer questions at the end too. Just for those who have joined a little late, every time we place up a question for the Slido, it will have the website as well as the hashtag for the meeting, and then you'll also see at the bottom right hand of the screen in that green kind of oval, there's also the hashtag for joining the meeting invite as well too. All right, so again, here's the information. This is the kind of the screen that you'll see when you sign up. So there will be questions that we'll want you to participate in as we go through everything today. And then as you have questions, you can also place those into a Q&A function on Slido. And you can like popular questions to make sure that they go to the top of the list to make sure that we answer those for you today as well. All right, and so to go ahead and test it out, we will kick off with a Slido question. And so just to kind of read the room and see who we have joining us today, the first question is basically to kind of gauge the familiarity of everyone with the FMA and BRIC programs that we have on the call today. So I will give everyone a few seconds to kind of get acclimated with the interface, and then also to answer the questions. All right, and we are, let's see, roughly halfway there. So if you are having any troubles with Slido, please let us know in the Google chat so we can try and help you out. All right, and as we are waiting for those last few responses to trickle in, so it looks like a little over half of the participants today are familiar with the programs, but perhaps they did not actually apply for a grant last year. Let's see, about 20% they have not applied and are not familiar, and then roughly 17% have applied for the program. So let's see, all in all, roughly 80% have some familiarity with the program. So that's great. So for a lot of you on the call today, this will kind of serve as a refresher of a lot of the information that you saw last year as you start to identify potential projects that you would like to pursue this year. Okay, so a few things that I want to use to set the stage as we head into our June webinars for this year's grant cycle is that first, there are no precedents set for BRIC yet. We get a lot of questions about, well, you know, what's been approved in the past, what has been done in the past, and although BRIC is replacing a previous FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance program, the fact still remains that there are actually no BRIC projects on the street just yet. So we've applied for the grants, and then FEMA anticipates making those decisions and releasing notifications and funding beginning in summer of 2021. So right now, essentially what we're doing is we are working off of last year's resources that were released by FEMA. We're looking at the previous pre-disaster mitigation awards to kind of see, hey, what was funded, how did we go about those things, and we're also building off of our real world experiences, especially when it comes to the application process from last year. So you might ask yourself, well, we don't have, you know, the notice of funding opportunity in hand yet. Why are we starting to do outreach? And the fact of the matter is that these are very complicated projects, and sometimes the application process can be extensive. So we want to make sure that we're giving you all enough information as early as possible so that you can go ahead and start on your applications and also start identifying potential projects so you can see what might be applicable to the programs and what might not be applicable. The big announcement that we do know about this upcoming grant cycle is that the federal government has allotted $1 billion to be made available nationwide for BRIC this year. So last year that there was $500 million available. So now that amount has been doubled. Still nationally competitive, but definitely a very large investment in mitigation for this upcoming year. Some other things to help us kind of gauge, you know, how to move this year. So FEMA has compiled information in regards to the number and kind of how things were dispersed last year for that grant cycle. So this map essentially shows, you know, how much funding communities applied for. So as you can see, it's still a very competitive program. So in all, there was $500 million available last year, and FEMA received approximately $3.6 billion in requests for funding. The types of projects that they received applications for last year, these are the top 10. So flood control projects kind of led the pack, followed by utility and infrastructure protection, structure retrofits, and you'll also see some other types of projects in there as well too. Elevations, acquisitions, those things are still eligible under the program, but you'll see kind of the distribution of what was applied for last year. All right, so moving into the overview of the actual programs. So first, we're going to discuss the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. So this program really aims to eliminate flood risk from properties and then communities in general. So it does prioritize what FEMA defines as a repetitive loss property or a severe repetitive loss property. And there are two differing definitions for those categories of funding. And so further in the presentation, I have the definitions that FEMA uses for these particular programs. And it also prioritizes properties that are insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. And so with that, this program, if you are going to do a mitigation project for an individual property, so, you know, residential or commercial, that property does have to carry a flood insurance property prior to the grant award. during the implementation of the grant award, and then indefinitely after the grant award as well too, right? And then this is also a funding source that can be used specifically to develop flood mitigation plans. Right. So these funds, they do become available annually. It is nationally competitive. This is specific only to flooding activities, kind of like as the name implies for that. The community itself has to be in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program. So if the community is suspended or anything like that, then the homeowners, business owners, anyone else in that community would actually not be able to apply for these grants. And then, like I mentioned earlier, any properties that you're completing a mitigation activity on for this grant program, they have to have a national flood insurance policy in perpetuity and then prior to applying as well too. Okay, so this one has a range of eligible activities. So it's going to be things like property acquisition and demolitions, acquisitions and relocations. So physically relocating that building from where it currently is and relocating it out of a hazardous flood area. We also do structure elevations, mitigation reconstruction. So if the structure has been substantially damaged, then there are opportunities to do a reconstruction activity through this grant program. And then dry flood proofing, but only for historic residential structures or non-residential structures. So dry flood proofing for a residential structure is an ineligible activity. And then, of course, larger scale risk reduction project, flood risk reduction projects, retrofits, a lot of infrastructure retrofits as well too. So we see a lot of like culvert enlargement type projects. Soil stabilization would be eligible, and then project scoping. So project scoping is essentially kind of doing the, let's say, feasibility studies. Yes, it is the same as the BRIC project scoping. And then also like the design and engineering, since this is specific to flooding, it also could be used for your hydrologic and hydrology studies as well too. So those H&H studies. And then there are opportunities for other types of activities. And again, if you have something that's not listed here, it's something that we can always explore and talk to our FEMA Region 3 counterparts to also determine the eligibility of that proposed activity. Okay, so all of the federal programs, they do have a cost share. So the cost share for here, there are different levels to it. It starts off as a 75% federal, 25% non-federal cost share. So that's taking the entire project cost, and then 75% of that would be able to be paid for through the grant, and then 25% of that would have to come from a non-federal source. So that non-federal source can come from a variety of places. If it is a homeowner project, it might come from the homeowner, the community, and so on. It just cannot come from another federal source. So then you can also receive increased cost shares. So if you have a repetitive loss property, and you'll see the definitions off there to the side, for a repetitive loss property, your federal cost share will be increased to 90%, and then the required non-federal cost share will only be 10%. And then it increases to 100% federal cost share if you have a severe repetitive loss property. So definitely, if you have these RL and SRL properties within your community, this is definitely a very good grant to pursue because you can get up to 100% federal funding for those severe repetitive loss properties. Okay, so under this grant program, there are several funding categories. So project scoping, community flood mitigation, technical assistance, flood hazard mitigation planning, and then individual flood mitigation projects as well. So under the project scoping category, as I was explaining earlier, this is kind of really used as seed money to do your design engineering. Perhaps you are still exploring potential projects to address some of the flooding concerns in your community. So you could also use it to do some project identification and feasibility studies as well. FEMA does have prioritization factors that they utilize as they start reviewing and ranking the projects. So I would definitely keep these in mind as you start to go through the process of potentially putting together an application to submit to us. So they are going to look at your community rating system participation. If you are participating in the Cooperating Technical Partners Program, what is the presence of private partnership within your project? So do you have any private investment? Looking at for the properties that will benefit from these projects, do they have NFIP policies? And then of course looking at the number of SRL and RL properties that will benefit from the projects as well too. So basically, especially when it comes to those prioritization factors for NFIP policies and SRL and RL properties, that is a lot of front end work that you'll want to make sure you do early on, so that you can ensure that you have that information and that your project is going to be eligible, and then potentially be able to get those points to score higher as well too. All right, so category number 2 is the community flood mitigation projects. So these are going to be your larger scale projects that are going to benefit a larger section of the community and of the population. So these are going to be localized flood control projects, floodwater storage and diversion projects. We have also seen some like underground aquifers and different things like that in other areas of the country. Any type of stream restoration, wetland restoration and creation, and then even projects to address any stormwater management issues that you might be facing. And so the prioritization factors for this category of funding are going to be the same that we just went over. Okay, category number 3 is just for technical assistance, so it's not funding, and so this is just for you to get support to continue implementing your flood mitigation programs. Now for this one, last year the requirement was that you had to have received a previous FMA award of $1 million or greater. So depending upon what the requirements will be moving into this year, this may or may not be a category of funding that you're eligible to apply for based on what that restriction might be. Category number 4 is for flood mitigation planning. So it's the same as what you would do for your typical hazard mitigation planning, but it is only to address the flood hazard. And then the 5th category is for individual flood mitigation projects. So these are more asset-based projects. So if you were doing like a residential elevation, acquisition, demolition, and so on for those types of projects. Okay. These are just some of the examples of projects that have been completed in Maryland. So the first picture is of dry flood proofing at a non-residential structure. So installing the floodgates to prevent flood waters from entering into those entry points and exit points of that structure. The second picture is a localized flood risk reduction project, and this was composed of culvert improvements as well as installing some riprap and gabions to stabilize the soil. And then the third one is one of those that falls into kind of the miscellaneous category. So this was for flood warnings and notification. So you'll see they have the yellow signage posted, but this could also include the installation of like a weather monitoring system or a siren system as well too, depending upon your hazard. Okay, so now moving into the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant program. So it's referred to as BRIC. The program was rolled out last year, was the first year that the program was actually in place for FEMA. And so the guiding principles of this program is that they really want to support community capability and capacity building, encourage innovation. So they are really looking for innovative projects that are beyond kind of the more traditional mitigation projects. There's a lot of emphasis on promoting partnerships, pursuing large infrastructure projects, creating additional flexibility within this program and providing additional consistency as well too. And so the consistency piece a lot of the times is focused on the release of the projects of the opening of the grant period. So previously, sometimes the grants would open up in May, they would open in June, they would open in September, but now FEMA is really trying harder to make it more consistent so that the communities and states can better plan to apply for these programs. So this is another program that is focused on funding available, or the funding is available annually. This one is also nationally competitive. So both of these programs are nationally competitive. So I do just want to emphasize that a lot. There is no guarantee that if you apply for either program that you would be awarded. So just remember, it is a standard grant program like everything else. There is no formula to guarantee a certain amount of money is going to come to the state or anything like that. And this one also has the greatest flexibility for activities. So it addresses all natural hazards under this program. And then you'll see when we start going into the different categories of funding that they have some additional activities included under BRIC that are not really available under the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. Right. So eligible activities. If you have prior experience with the pre-disaster mitigation program, all of those activities are still eligible. The areas where they've expanded eligibility under BRIC are going to include project scoping, which is the same as the FMA project scoping that we've gone over. Building code activities are now eligible, as well as wildfire and wind activities, and then earthquake as well too. So the most important thing to remember about these projects is that they still have to be cost effective. So if you're familiar with FEMA's benefit cost analysis, you still have to complete a BCA and have a benefit cost ratio of 1.0 or higher, signifying that it's cost effective. It has to address natural hazards. So a lot of the projects that people are proposing now, they definitely have co-benefits, which is great and something we really want to encourage and work after, but we have to remember that the primary intent of these projects still has to be to decrease the risk from a natural hazard. The projects have to, or the communities have to have the latest two building codes adopted. It has to align with your hazard mitigation plan. So this is also another great opportunity why we're doing this so early, is so that you can start looking back through your community's hazard mitigation plan to, number one, see what the goals were, see what the actions were in that plan, and then determine how your proposed project fits into that plan. And then you still have to meet all of the environmental and historic preservation requirements. Okay, so the cost share for this one, it does not have as many levels as the FMA program has. In general, all of the projects are subject to the 75% federal, 25% non-federal cost share. The way that you do get an increase, the only exception is for what FEMA defines as small and impoverished communities. So if you meet that criteria, that definition, then your federal cost share will increase to 90%, and then you only be required to contribute 10% in non-federal funds. And so last year they had revised the definition a bit, and so it was stated that you had to be a community of 3,000 or fewer individuals, and that the per capita annual income could not exceed 80% of the national per capita income. Previous to that, they also had a criteria that was geared towards unemployment rates as well too, but I don't have any indication yet if that is something that would be incorporated into the FY2021 requirements for the program or not. But right now, that is the definition for small and impoverished communities to receive the increased federal cost share. Okay, so this one has several funding categories as well too. The three overarching categories are capability and capacity building, mitigation projects, so think of your traditional kind of construction projects, and then what FEMA terms as direct technical assistance, and that is a non-financial technical assistance. So within the capacity and capability building category, there are several like subcategories for you to focus and apply for as well too. So that includes building code activities, building partnerships, project scoping, and then your more traditional like hazard mitigation planning is also included in that category. All right, so for building code activities, this could be to support the evaluation of codes, adoption and implementation of codes. It's also can be used to incorporate higher standards and then also to do some professional development work to increase the capabilities of your building code staff. So partnership activities, this is a range of things. So it can be used to conduct a gap analysis or to do network building. So to determine like what your network looks right now, where are the gaps and how to fill in those gaps. A lot of training, developing a partner database, holding meetings or forums to share best practices and lessons learned as well too. Okay. And then project scoping, we talked about this a few different times now, but again, it's used to do a lot of the front end work that's going to be needed to develop a full application for a subsequent project. Okay, so then for your planning, hazard mitigation planning, so it's the four major components, developing your hazard identification and risk assessment, which is the HIRA, doing a vulnerability assessment, capability assessment, and then also developing your mitigation strategy. And so remember earlier I said that to be eligible for these, or later on, I guess I will say that to be eligible for these, each community has to have a FEMA approved and locally adopted hazard mitigation plan. So this is the funding source to develop the plan and update the plan as required every 5 years. Okay, so then the category 2 is your mitigation projects. So again, a lot of the same eligible projects and activities that you saw for the flood mitigation assistance project, but since this is an all hazards program, it also includes generators, safe room construction, wind retrofits, and a lot of other activities as well too. And then again, just the reminders of what the projects have to accomplish in order to be eligible. Okay, so then for the direct technical assistance, this is non-financial technical assistance. So this is meant to improve a community's capacity and capability to implement mitigation activities. It's meant to increase the resilience to natural hazards. And for this one, the community cannot have received a FEMA HMA award in the past 5 years, and it is for small and impoverished communities. Now, this was a new category of assistance, I guess I should say, that was introduced with the rollout of BRIC last year. We have not received any indication if this will remain, if this will go away, or if this will change yet. And last year, this category of assistance was limited to 10 communities throughout the nation. Okay, and so now just to pause after we've kind of gone through the high level overview of the programs, is that we're curious to start knowing what kind of projects you all are considering applying for this year. So you should be able to now enter in different types of activities that you're interested in to give us an idea of some of the areas we might want to focus in on as we continue to do outreach for the BRIC and FMA program. So I will give people a few moments to respond to that. All right, and while we're waiting for a few more responses to come in, we'll start going through these. So I see that there, I saw building codes on here, which is great. We actually did not receive any building code proposals last year, so that'll be exciting to see that. Lots of things to address stormwater management, generators, of course, a lot of flood mitigation activities, stream and wetland restoration, that would be fantastic. Again, with the rollout of BRIC, one of the things that FEMA has really been promoting and encouraging communities to pursue is also looking at nature-based solutions and how those can be used for natural hazard mitigation as well too. Let's see, I see studies, acquisitions, protection of critical facilities. All right. Okay, perfect. And you all can continue to complete that and send in your ideas and different things like that. And like I said, this is really helpful because then it lets us know kind of what areas we should focus on as we do start to develop additional outreach materials for our communities here in Maryland. All right, so who is actually eligible to apply for these grants? So it's not a very straightforward answer, I will say. And I think this is where a lot of people who do not have as much prior experience with the grant programs, it gets a little fuzzy for everyone. So I'm going to try and explain it as straightforward as I can. So essentially, you have FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as the grantor. The state of Maryland, for us, the sole applicant and recipient for our entire state is going to be MEMA, so the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. So in order for someone outside of MEMA to apply, you would apply directly to MEMA. Now, only local governments and state agencies are eligible sub-applicants to MEMA. So if you are not within either one of those categories, so if you are a individual, a business, a nonprofit, you have to work with your local government or a state agency, and then they would be charged with essentially kind of sponsoring your application so that they can apply to MEMA, and then MEMA takes all of those applications and we submit one kind of comprehensive application to go to FEMA. So the money flows the same way, but basically, in summary, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, not eligible to apply directly. You have to work with a local government or your state agency. The state agencies and local governments will then apply directly to MEMA, and MEMA is the sole applicant directly to FEMA. All right, so if you do have any questions about sub-applicant eligibility and kind of who applies or maybe who your local point of contact is for your local government, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll have our email address here at the end of the presentation, but it's just mitigation.mema@maryland.gov, and we can certainly get you in contact with your proper local contact as well too. Okay, so I am curious to know who all we have joining us today to see, you know, are we speaking directly to the eligible sub-applicants, or if, you know, we have some opportunities maybe to build additional partnerships here as we continue to move forward. So again, I'll give everybody a few seconds to respond to that so we can gauge who we have with us today. All right, so the overwhelming majority definitely falls within the local government category, then followed by state government. So those are, again, those are the two entities that are actual eligible sub-applicants and can put in, you know, applications without having to be sponsored by anyone. And then as far as the nonprofit and private entities that we have represented here today, like I said, you can certainly partner with a state agency or a local government organization. And again, FEMA is promoting partnerships. So these are really great opportunities to come together and develop really great projects to submit. All right, and thank you all for participating in that. All right, so in addition to the actual kind of classification, you know, like who's a sub-applicant and who's not a sub-applicant, as I mentioned previously, you also have to have an eligible FEMA hazard mitigation or FEMA a local hazard mitigation plan. So it has to be approved by FEMA and locally adopted by the FEMA deadline. So last year, that deadline was late January. And I'm going to get into kind of the nuances of deadlines a little later. So you'll want to make sure that not only has the county adopted that plan, but if you are a municipality applying, that the municipality has also adopted the plan as well too. I mentioned you'll also have to provide us with a benefit cost analysis, so that is part of your application. And then there are going to be additional, you know, requirements. It's not this simple, unfortunately, and all those specifics will be released in the Notice of Funding Opportunity by FEMA when that becomes available tentatively in the late summer. Okay, so timeline. This is really important to make sure, you know, you don't miss any major dates or anything like that. As I've kind of stated before, we are being very proactive here in Maryland. And so we're doing a lot of our engagement early on to kind of lay that foundation of what could be eligible, what's potentially not eligible. So we are asking that over the course of the next few months, as you begin to think about the types of activities that you like to pursue, when you review your local hazard mitigation plans to see what projects you'd like to implement from the plan as well too, that you submit to us your notice of interest by August 31st, 2021, so a few months from now. Now, the remaining items on this timeline are all tentative because a lot of those are driven by when FEMA releases the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So tentatively, what we project is that the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which lays out the specifics of each grant program, will become available in September. The actual application portal that you'll have to utilize to submit your applications will become available October 2021. So using kind of that timeline, November is the very rough time frame from when your full application would be due to MEMA. So this is very important. The MEMA deadline for when sub-applicants need to submit to MEMA is very different than the timeline and the due date that you're going to see FEMA release. So when you see items released directly by FEMA, a lot of times those resources are dedicated for the state. So when you see deadlines released by FEMA, those are most likely when the states have to get information to FEMA. So always just, if you are unsure of when something is due, feel free just to reach out to us, and that, you know, will help both of us. So tentatively, your applications will be due to MEMA in November, and MEMA's application would be due to FEMA potentially in January 2022. And like I said, with the exception of the NOI date, all of this is very tentative and dependent upon when FEMA releases their Notice of Funding Opportunity. Okay, so additional next steps for you to take. So like I said, start thinking about your projects and also submit to us a notice of interest. So we do require these for anyone who wants to pursue a BRIC or FMA grant, because this is utilized as our pre-screening form. So there is no need for you to put in the time and resources to develop a final application. only to get to the finish line in November, and we have to come back and tell you that your project is actually not eligible. So this pre-screening form allows us to, again, do a preliminary review to make sure that the project aligns with the goals, intents, and requirement of the programs. It also gives us the opportunity to make sure that you're able to secure your non-federal share, and it gives us a rough idea of the potential costs for the projects as well too. So if you've done the programs before, we used to have a Word document that we would send out, and that served as our NOI. We are trying to make the program more efficient, so we've created a Google form that is linked here and can also be found on our website. So if you fill out the Google form, that would be great, because then that allows us to keep better track and better records of everything. Okay, and then the next thing that you can kind of go ahead and do is to register for FEMA GO. So FEMA GO is FEMA's grants management system to organize all of these sub-applications and then subsequent grant management forms that you'll be required to complete as well too. If you registered for FEMA GO last year, you do not need to register again. If you are not sure if you are registered or not, please feel free to reach out to us at mitigation.mema@maryland.gov, and we can definitely check that for you as well too. So you'll go to the website listed here, go.fema.gov, to start the registration process. When we send out the slides and recording from today, I'll also include one of FEMA's guidance documents that will assist you and provide the instructions for how to actually register in FEMA GO. Again, based on our real world experiences of last year, even if you are not 100% sure that you want to apply for a grant this year, I would still recommend that you go ahead and register in FEMA GO, just to avoid any technical challenges that might occur at the last minute when you go to register. Okay, another great resource if you're a little stuck and you're like, I know that, I have issues in my communities as far as hazards, but I'm a little stuck on the innovative, project piece. So FEMA actually developed what they call a mitigation action portfolio, and it provides case studies from across the country. It's really nice because it's organized by hazard types, so you don't have to go fishing through this entire document. And then as more materials start to come out about BRIC, you'll also notice a lot of mention of what FEMA terms community lifelines. And so this document also kind of shows you how projects address different community lifelines as well too. And it gives you really great details about the scope, cost, funding sources, partners, and timelines as well too. So we will also send that out as an attachment when we send out the slides. And these are just some general best practices. So build upon whatever existing efforts you have in your community. Make sure you're seeking out multidisciplinary solutions, because that also leads to projects that have co-benefits. And it's like killing two birds with one stone. Also, try and build partnerships with, private entities, additional stakeholders, whatever the case may be, and neighboring jurisdictions as well too. So what are some regional opportunities that you might be able to pursue? A lot of natural hazards, they don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. So those are prime opportunities to look at regional opportunities. And then also looking to take a whole community approach. So again, focused on how do we build these partnerships, and then prioritizing those community lifelines, because those do get you additional points when you submit these projects to FEMA. Okay, so with that, if there are, I will start going through the Google chat, and then also the questions that have been submitted through Slido as well too. So the first one is, can the BRIC program fund flood mitigation projects outside the special flood hazard area? Absolutely. So we get that question a lot, and not only for like an individual home or something like that, but the project or the property does not have to be within FEMA's mapped floodplain. So the special flood hazard area, 1% annual chance, 100-year flood, 500-year flood, everything that you want to call it. The projects do not have to be within that boundary in order to receive BRIC funding. Right, and I'm gonna go back up to the chat. Let's see, we answered the one about, is BRIC scoping the same as the FMA scoping? Should you apply for both? When you go in to do your application, the way it was set up last year is that there was actually nothing to distinguish if you were applying for FMA or for BRIC. So you will just put in an application. And once we at the state review your application, we will make a recommendation. Like if your project can potentially fit into both programs, we'll make a recommendation to you about which one we feel would be better suited for your project. And we'll have that discussion with you as far as if you should do FMA versus BRIC. Let's see, repetitive loss data. Right, repetitive loss data does usually go with a regulated floodplain. So in regards to the FMA program, they are really going to be looking at the flood insurance policies and claims. So that is how they'll determine it for there. So if you have areas outside of the MAP floodplain where properties have flood insurance policies, which again, I know that the struggles there, then yes, the FMA can help outside of that. So this might also be an instance where it might be more appropriate for us to pursue a BRIC grant due to the limitations on those NFIP policies outside of the floodplain. CTP is cooperating technical partner. Maintaining flexibility. So again, a lot of the flexibility as far as the BRIC program comes under that capacity and capability building category. So that's where you're going to see the greatest flexibility in the types of activities that you can carry out. Let's see, could BRIC planning grants be used for government facilities? Kim, I might have to email you just to figure out exactly what types of planning activities you might be thinking about. But if it's like, it's mainly for the local hazard mitigation plans, like the actual planning category of funding. So, you know, that does provide an opportunity to look at where your, you know, community assets might be if they're in the floodplain and different things like that. Let's see, so if we are reapproving our plan this summer, we will be eligible for next year. Yes, so again, you just have to have your local hazard mitigation plan locally adopted and FEMA approved by the application deadline, which is going to be like the state application deadline when we have to turn our materials into FEMA. So if you do it this summer, you'll be good to go, because I don't anticipate the state deadline to FEMA to be until January 2022. All right, so going back into the Slido questions now. Are partnerships with Maryland colleges or universities eligible to participate? Yes. So if you form a partnership with some academic entity, that's an eligible partnership. It gets interesting because I believe technically schools in the University of Maryland system are considered a state agency, so I believe they can also directly apply. And certainly for instances like this where it seems a little gray about eligibility, just let us know and we can confirm that with FEMA. If I am a state agency applying for funding, does the county where the project is proposed need to have an approved hazard mitigation plan? Yes, it does. So wherever the physical location of that project is, that is where you need to have an approved hazard mitigation plan. All right, and I will give it a second or two for any remaining questions. All right, and so seeing none, in the slide, we also have some additional resources that you'll receive, and you'll be able to just click the links to go to those. But besides that, here is the email address where you can contact us if you have any follow-up questions. We do have 2 additional webinars on June 9th, and then another one on June 16th. The link for those meetings is going to be the same. Yes, you'll get a copy of the slides. And besides that, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And we will see you next week on June 9th to discuss mitigation in action. Have a nice day, everyone.